The House Ways and Means Committee has released transcripts from the federal investigation into Hunter Biden. A panel voted to make almost 400 pages of interviews with two IRS employees, including Criminal Supervisory Special Agent Gary Shapley, public. According to the testimony, the DOJ, FBI, and IRS interfered with the Hunter Biden probe. Ways and Means Chairman Jason Smith said the testimony, quote, outlines misconduct and government abuse at the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the investigation of Hunter Biden.
The committee also approved the release of a transcript of the private session, which was reportedly held because the documents, quote, included taxpayer information protected under the tax code, Roll Call writes. According to Smith, the panel has not requested any of Hunter Biden's tax returns. According to the testimony, President Joe Biden was there when Hunter Biden messaged Chinese businessman Henry Zhao on WhatsApp. The message reportedly read, "I am sitting here with my father, and we would like to understand why the commitment made has not been fulfilled. Tell the director that I would like to resolve this now before it gets out of hand, and now means tonight. And Z, if I get a call or text from anyone involved in this other than you, Zhang, or the chairman, I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows and my ability to forever hold a grudge, that you will regret not following my direction. I am sitting here waiting for the call with my father." House Speaker Kevin McCarthy tweeted, "Here's what we just learned from IRS whistleblower testimony. The IRS gave Hunter Biden's tax case preferential treatment. The DOJ interfered with the investigation at every turn. The IRS retaliated against those very whistleblowers for telling the truth." NBC reporter Garrett Hake said that the White House said President Biden has, quote, upheld his commitment to let this investigation proceed free of any political interference, and that a DOJ spokesman, quote, denied any such interference. So, Jess, this is the latest in a line of corruption related to the Biden family that we've talked about on this show. But this is a very particular indictment of the FBI and the IRS because they claim that Hunter Biden basically got a sweetheart deal and that the DOJ actually interfered with the investigatory process.
Yeah, the way I see this is they get this document from, a informant, right? The FBI spends about $42 million annually on dealing with informants, and the document itself has been obtained by now members of Congress, but Rudy Giuliani initially, tipping folks off that this document existed is really interesting. That part of this process has been political. I think the FBI deciding that, well, we can't disprove it, but we can't prove it either, tells us what we need to know, right? Because what we know about this document is allegedly $5 million went to Hunter Biden, $5 million to Joe Biden, but they said that it would be very difficult to trace. And we know that very wealthy people are very, very good at hiding their money overseas in foreign accounts and executing transactions that are very difficult to trace. And perhaps this is the FBI saying, well, we actually don't have the capacity to trace how this money was transferred between accounts. And so we can't prove this. What kind of a position does that put the FBI in? I think they were embarrassed to reveal they didn't have the capacity to arrive at a conclusion when it comes to this case. And I think James Comer has put forward, a pretty good strategy legislatively where senior officials would have to disclose their transactions with foreign corporations. However, if they're very confident that their transactions are untraceable, will they? Is that really a solution? And it puts us in a really precarious situation when it comes to that. I also think the Democrats deciding to not make the information public is really telling. I hope that they do at the conclusion of their investigation.
Yeah, it's also really bizarre, some of the statements that have been made by Attorney General Merrick Garland in regards to the IRS case involving Hunter Biden, because when he testified to Chuck Grassley previously, he claimed that there was no interference in the case and that the special prosecutors were able to take the case in whichever state that they wanted. But according to this whistleblower, they wanted to try the case in California or another state because they weren't getting anywhere in Delaware, and they were actually denied the ability to do that from the highest levels of the DOJ. So there's a fundamental contradiction and what the whistleblower is saying and in what Merrick Garland is saying, not to mention the fact that Hunter Biden's lawyers, right after this sweetheart deal was announced, were trying to claim that Hunter was also settling with London Roberts, the mother of his child in that Arkansas child support case, for $5,000 a month, despite previously paying her $20,000 a month. Whereas a source very close to the case tells me that there has been no settlement and that there has been no dollar amount close to $5,000 announced yet. So it seemed like another intentional move for Hunter Biden's legal team to try to make it seem like all of his possible court troubles were over.
How embarrassing would it be if we had the lawyers of London Roberts obtain more financial information on Hunter Biden than the FBI or DOJ or Congress were able to? That would be terribly embarrassing and would really expose fractures in our legal system and corruption in the United States. And it seems that that's the reality we're going towards. And it's because the lawyers of London Roberts are the former lawyers for the Trump administration disputing election fraud, or actually alleging election fraud in the state of Wisconsin. These are the same lawyers that took that case that are now Hunter Biden's mother of his children's lawyers about that settlement reducing the child support payments that Hunter Biden is paying to her. The fact that that could expose more financial information on Hunter Biden than any kind of investigation by the folks who are supposed to investigate this stuff at the federal level is insane. And it shows the state of our country. I think Merrick Garland has done a pretty terrible job when it comes to investigating things that happen at the federal level in our country. And I believe people at both sides of the aisle at this point feel that way. And the FBI is clearly not equipped to investigate what we would expect them to investigate. So what kind of intelligence is required to investigate transactions overseas when it comes to tracing financial payments of this nature? I don't think anybody at the federal level is incentivized to do that, because most people who end up becoming senior officials are people who also have foreign dealings with multinational corporations. And so it's got to come from somewhere else. And I hope it's something that comes out of Congress following this investigation.
We also have to question if the FBI is embarrassed or if they don't have any shame, because if the whistleblower's allegations are true, this was an intentional cover-up, not just an inability to properly investigate. They claim that the investigation was slow-walked in some instances. In other instances, they were trying to speed up certain investigatory efforts. They apparently were trying to pause certain portions of the investigation until after the 2020 election. And also, there was apparently interference in some of their efforts to uncover certain documents related to the case. And according to roll call, though, Democrats did not resist entering the private session on Thursday, but they actually voted against making information public at its end. Chairman Smith said the meeting to vote on the release, quote, is about transparency and bringing to light facts about alleged government misconduct, roll call writes. And to your point, Jessica, earlier about, politicians who might have their own corruption being unwilling to make all of this stuff public, they might think that they're protecting themselves, but I think their no votes say it all.
Right. I think that the black box of the transaction, fine. We have a black box. We can see perhaps that money went out from executives of Burisma, and that money went in around the similar time of the amount of $5 million to Hunter and Joe Biden. And I think that would have been enough for the FBI to pursue further investigation or even make the information public or turn it over to the Oversight Committee. But that's not what happened. To use the excuse that we can't investigate it, I agree, is perhaps no shame rather than them being embarrassed of their inability to investigate it. I think the FBI would very much be able to get the resources necessary to just see the money going into the account when it comes to Hunter and Joe Biden and out of the account when it comes to the Burisma executives. And so it's not good partisan politics. If you want to, be a Democrat and say you really care about our democracy and the freedom of information, but in this case, you don't want to make this investigation public, I don't like that, just as someone who likes democracy. And I would say the same thing if it were Republicans doing it. I just don't think it's right. I think the American people have a right to know.
Yeah, exactly. And I always think of the FBI's long-running investigation into Crossfire Hurricane, which was Of course, the allegation that former President Donald Trump was being blackmailed by the Russians and that he was colluding with them in order to win election in 2016. They spent so many resources on that. They really tugged at every single possible thread. The Durham report has revealed that that investigation was essentially baseless from the get-go and that the FBI engaged in all kinds of misconduct in order to try to reach the conclusion that Trump was guilty. And so to see them leave no stone unturned in a case that was false and then turn around and the Bidens have had seemingly no investigation into their allegedly corrupt foreign business practices, it becomes quite obvious that there's a double standard of justice in our country.
Yeah, I think that's really at the heart of this, that we're not seeing folks be investigated for crimes that are pretty large, right? Colluding with foreign governments or the leaders of multinational corporations, taking payments, using your position of influence and power to accumulate more money and influence legislation. It's just corruption by definition. And our justice system has, adversarial taste when it comes to actually investigating corruption. But we have people who are currently sitting in prison. Some people are in prison for life, who have done way lesser things of lesser consequence in the eyes of ethics, perhaps not in the eyes of law in the United States, but law and justice are not always the same thing. It doesn't make sense to me that we have people that are in prison right now for using marijuana. But we have people that are very high-level executives that are responsible for the sickness and death of many people because they've lobbied against regulations and have taken bribes and lobbied members of the DOJ to not investigate them. Like, those two things existing in the same justice system tells us really who's in power in this country. And it's people who have a lot of wealth and who are willing to use it in very corrupt ways. And weeding that out is going to be difficult when the same people responsible for running our system of justice and making legislation are people who have a vested financial interest in keeping things as they are. And so, unfortunately, I think a lot of this stuff sounds like legal jargon to a lot of people in the United States. I don't think a lot of people find it terribly interesting, the inner workings of FBI investigations. It's not very sexy stuff. And I think that a consequence of that is less people are involved in maintaining the health of our democracy just because this seems boring, and perhaps intentionally so. I think if it was reported on in a way that made it very accessible, perhaps more people would be involved. And I think that that's a failure of legacy media.
I'm not a big fan of modern rap music, and I can't remember the guy's name who was involved in this, but I saw that his lawyer shared that he had spent 3 years in prison for essentially the same tax crime that Hunter Biden is pleading guilty to and getting probation. So pretty incredible. Kodak Black, apparently, is his name. Thank you to the production team here at Rising. But yeah, exactly to your point, Jessica, about how there are people in prison spending years behind bars for the same or less severe crimes that the first son is getting a pass on.
Yeah, and we don't really know if this is confirmed. We don't know if the FBI were to investigate this, they would be able to prove it. We don't have that information yet. It makes me feel better that it's out of the hands of the FBI now, but these allegations of collusion between the IRS and the DOJ, would I call it collusion? Would I call it them collaborating on investigation? I don't know. I think language is important. But nevertheless, it seems that they didn't do a good job in thoroughly investigating this, and that's what I take issue with. It could be, disproved in a few weeks, but we're not at that point. And the fact that our DOJ and our IRS and the FBI are not taking it as seriously as they should have at the point when they got this whistleblower document is really my chief concern. Hunter Biden could be entirely innocent at this point. I don't know how politically across party lines people feel about this, but it does seem to be, unfortunately, very partisan. And I wish we could come from a place of just, we need to investigate this more. It could go either way, and it doesn't sound good. I think that's a fine place to be without falling strongly one way or the other. And I'm very interested to see what legislation comes out of this to prevent things like this from happening moving forward, rather than it just being a partisan fight to take down the Bidens.
It is pretty incredible that Republicans, who I generally think, I think all politicians are basically bumbling idiots, have managed to untangle this supposedly faster than the FBI and other investigatory bodies. We're going to have to leave it there, and we'll be back with more Rising after this.